This video contains an interview with my father, Joe Kelly, who served in the Army in World War II and participated in the Aleutian Theater. I will provide a little background to this interview, providing some references where some more detail is provided for those that are interested. Then I will provide the audio recording of my father and the interviewer, Gene Culbertson, and I will provide some photos and some maps during the audio portion to clarify his comments. The Aleutian Islands were a theater of World War II because the Japanese bombed some installations in Dutch Harbor, Alaska, and captured two islands in the Aleutians, Attu and Kiska, in the middle of 1942, which was part of the Midway operation. The American objective was to remove the Japanese from occupation of American land. My father, Joe Kelly, was drafted into the Army just before the Pearl Harbor attack in 1941. Due to his familiarity with Alaska, he was assigned to a special group, the 1st Combat Intelligence Platoon. They had two other nicknames. They called themselves the Alaska Scouts, but they were also known as Castner's Cutthroats. That was a name given to them from outside the organization by the media. Colonel Lawrence Castner, organized the unit. That's why it has his name. And there were more than 60 men in the unit, and they were specifically recruited due to their skills in living off the land in Alaska and surviving. The interview that I'm about to present ranges over the life of the involvement of the Scouts in the war in Alaska. It starts first with a reconnaissance of one of the Aleutian Islands close to Attu, Adak. It then moves through reconnaissance, a description of reconnaissance on some of the other islands, such as Amchitka. And then there's a description of the role that the Alaska Scouts had, a special role, in the Battle of Attu as well as the landing of Kiska. Again, their focus was mainly reconnaissance and intelligence. They did participate in some fighting. Finally, they discuss the remainder of the wartime effort of the Alaska Scouts. And now I will switch to the audio recording of the interview with my father. It was conducted by Gene Culbertson on July 5th, 1976.
Started to the Aleutian Islands, I would say about around the first part of August of 1942, when we flew out there on a couple missions, but PB-wise, overlooked the islands, and of course, we knew there was no Japanese on Adak. We knew they were just in that too. They did make a short camping on Agatu, but did not stay there. And we left anchorage on the yacht Kavanaugh about approximately the middle of August 1942 with Colonel Castner and Captain Bob Thompson with approximately 40 scouts, which we went from there to Unalaska. And on Alaska, we got our gear together, and we were supposed to have boats that we would put together, big Umiak style, like the Eskimos have, and then leave the submarines and out of the shore. Well, we decided it would take too much time to put that type of boat together from start on the surface of the submarine, so we went to rubber rafts. Well, I went down the first night, which was on a submarine called the Triton. And about 4 miles off of Adak, they surfaced, and we got on deck and got out of the rubber rafts, and we were supposed to pull a lever, and the CO2 cartridge was supposed to inflate the rubber rafts. There wasn't a CO2 cartridge that worked on all of the rubber rafts. So we had to start pumping up by hand, and then the captain, the skipper of the submarine, the commander, got very excited. In fact, threatened to dive it if the moon come out. And Colonel Castner, of course, he got quite excited about diving it. He didn't like that idea at all. But eventually we got the boats pumped up by hand and started to paddle ashore, and he gave us a compass direction. And of course, wasn't a clear night, but it wasn't a completely cloudy night either. So visibility was quite good, and weather was exceptionally calm with no offshore wind. Because if there had been an offshore wind, knowing now what I know about rubber boats, you couldn't have got anywhere. And we did after. Probably took us about 4 hours to paddle those 4 miles ashore. But we did make it. We landed just about the entrance of Clam Lagoon, maybe toward Sweeper's Cove, 1/8 of a mile or so.
Yeah, I think that's what they call underground hospital now.
Yeah.
Beach there.
Mm-hmm. You got a place there where you got the bridge across there too. And then we split up into groups. And I happened to be on the group that we headed for the Bay of Islands. And different groups went to different parts of the island. And then the second night, the next submarine came in, which was a tuna. And he came, I would say, within 200 or 300 yards ashore, put his machine gun on deck and covered the boys as they went ashore.
Did they think that there were Japs on there?
We weren't taking no chances. We didn't know for sure. Because our aerial observation showed no Japanese on there, but you can make mistakes on aerial observation, which is quite often happens. There was none there, and we found no evidence of any ever landing there. None whatsoever. And then we completely reconnoitered the island, and approximately 5 days later, then our troop ships came in, and that turned out to be quite a fiasco because the storm come up, and I don't know whose fault it was. It could have been ours, but we should have, or they should have, or somebody should have encouraged them coming into Sweeper's Cove. We tried to unload in Kulak Bay, and we lost a lot of equipment and supplies and stuff. But everybody that looked at Sweeper's Cove said it wasn't big enough, which wasn't exactly true. They could have had to find. They didn't want to bunch up anything on account of bombing attacks. It's the main thing.
How many ships approximately were in this landing force?
I don't know, but it was, my golly, it wasn't like a landing force should be. One boat might have all bombs and gasoline on it instead of things being split up, but there was quite a few in there. There must have been 15 ships total. And then, of course, one of the first things was done, which was very rapid on that, we had the 807th Engineers put in there. And it was under Colonel Talley. And he had a sub-officer by the name of DeLong, who was in very bad condition now, but he was head of Morse Canoe Company in Alaska. And there was a big lake in there where the runway is today. And it was only, you could wade it, it was only a couple feet deep in a level sand bottom. So they drained that and put it in steel matting, and it wasn't 4 or 5 days till we had P-40s coming in there, and we was bombing the Japs.
That was a smart move.
Yeah, it was, yeah. In fact, I remember one day we were standing there at Avalos. In fact, Colonel DeLong was there, and here comes some plane over and says, what kind of plane is that? Nobody, I don't know who it is. He dropped a couple of bombs, and we knew who it was.
Well, I think, 3 or 4 days this fellow came over. Didn't they call him Good Time Charlie or something like that?
Yeah.
He's alluded to in several of the books.
Now, he flew over us. When I was on a reconnaissance at Amchitka just a couple of weeks after we done, and I went to Amchitka for a 48-hour reconnaissance. They flew us over with PBY. In fact, that picture up there is it was Bob Thompson, Captain Bob Thompson, Colonel Verbeck, Sergeant Walker, and myself. We were left there for 48 hours by a PBY, and that Jap flew over us twice every day, once every morning, once every evening. And they done it very wisely. They flew over early enough in the morning before it was daylight enough for our planes to get over, and they come over late enough in the evening that our planes wouldn't be there, so
they got a good chance to look at.
Yeah. And, well, they didn't want to get in any aerial combat with anybody, because our P-40s were much superior to the float-type planes and the Zeros that they had the Castner. They weren't too good.
Yeah. How long did you stay on ADAC when you were doing the first reconnaissance?
First reconnaissance, we went in just approximately 6 days ahead of the troops, and I stayed there until, just November that time.
Oh, you were there several months?
Yeah, well, I made a trip to Tanaga, Samasapochanoi, and Amchick, all.
Was with this?
We were traveling most of the time.
Oh, were you looking on the other island to establish more bases, or what was the
Every
purpose?
possibility of landing, you look for everything. Where you might build a runway, easy, everything was of importance.
What did you use for equipment, and how about surviving? Did you live off the land?
We tried to live pretty much off the land. Our main food that we packed with us was rice, bacon, sugar, tea, and salt, and very little else. And of course, we would shoot a seal or catch a salmon, and of course, there's these pogies or Japanese perch, or whatever you want to call them, which is a very good eating fish, and we have never found an island that you couldn't get those on. Ptarmigan.
Well, had all of you and Castner's Raiders been used to living off the land and survival, or did you have training?
No, we had, most of us had either been out prospecting, trapping, or something in our life, and had had a few years in Alaska. And you, in the group of 40 that he had in the scouts, you had somebody from every part of Alaska. There's no part of Alaska that he didn't have somebody in that knew that country real well. That's how he put it together. In fact, his father's name was Joseph Castner, who organized the Philippine Scouts. And Colonel Lawrence V. Castner, he copied his father very much in organizing the Alaska Scouts under the same deal that his father had organized the Philippine Scouts. They had a thorough knowledge of the country.
Well, who was the representative in the group that was supposed to know the Aleutians the best?
I don't know really who knew it the best, but we had Nels Hedlund in there, who was half Eskimo. We had Simeon Plitnikoff from Dutch Harbor. We had Billy Buck from King Cove. And we had Donald Buck from Nome. And we had quite a few. And then we even had a trapper who was a civilian, but yet he was assigned to us, whose name was Walter Kamsack, who was one of the trappers on Adak and Canada.
You mentioned that they had been a fox fur farming company out there, this Canada
Ranching Company, that is correct. And the Canada Ranching Company had, in fact, Simeon Plitnikoff he had trapped out there on Canada and Adak. He, full-blooded Aleut, or about as close as you can come to a full-blooded Aleut, was on the payroll of the Canada Ranching Company.
Well, then there were cabins in here. Did you ever use these cabins on the island?
Absolutely. In fact, we had it figured out. So about a 2 hours walk, you could find either a cabin or a barabri to sleep in. And when you walked so far, then you started to open your eyes up, and you could tell by the way the grass grew if it was a barabri. There were more barabris, of course, than cabins. And you got so where you could spot a barabri just about a mile away because it was warm, dry, and a good place to sleep.
Yeah. So you didn't worry so much about the tents?
No, we didn't take no tents.
Oh, you didn't take any tents at all?
Scouts never carried any tent at all. We carried a piece of canvas that was 4 foot wide and 10 foot long. And you could put 2 sleeping bags in that, fold that back up over you, and then you could peg it down on the side. You had eyes to peg it down on the side, and that would be our tent, rather than have a tent that you pitched or something to go away. Yeah, so the wind is too tough to pick tents.
That's true.
But in the Aleutians, you could always find a barabri. But I can tell you one instance, one night, was Captain Bob Thompson and I were on the north side of Amchitka, and we left this PBY and we was hiking toward the west end of the island, and we knew that there had to be a barabri close. But it got darker and darker, and pretty soon it was so dark we couldn't move, and of course we had no sleeping bags. You couldn't afford them. As that sort of reconnaissance, you couldn't afford to carry a sleeping bag. So we took our hunting knives and cut up a great big pile of this beach grass, even though it's wet, you can crawl in and then get close together and warm, and you can make it. You can sleep. It's warm. It's damp, but we did that, and the next morning we woke up. We wasn't 10 feet from a nice dry barrage.
Oh.
Not even 10 feet. Yeah.
Oh.
And we had oodles of experience like that.
Well, what about your footwear? Now they talk so much about the Battle of Attu.
That was a very sad situation. We had both Colonel Verbeck and Colonel Castner made special trips to California to try to get the 7th Division wear what we call a shoe pack, which is rubber bottoms and leather tops down there on account of the type of weather it is at 32 degrees. And they told both Colonel Castner and Colonel Verbeck that they'd take the responsibility of the credit for what happened. They knew what they were doing. And these fellows went in there with that, and by far, most casualties we had in the Battle of the Aleutians was due to what they then brought up the name, as far as I know, what they call it, immersion foot. These leather boots would get wet, and these fellows would get that foxhole, and they wouldn't move. And after a few days, circulation would stop, and it ended up with amputation.
That's what's been so sad. But you people did have proper shoes.
And these shoe packs are fine because every scout carried an extra pair of socks right next to your skin above his belt. And these shoe packs, you could take off that, wring out that insole, wring out that sock, take these dry socks out, put on, and you could change a couple times a day. And you never had feet uncomfortable.
Well, you have to if you're going to walk as far and as fast as you people.
That's right. And what I did, I went down with part of the 7th Division. I got split up on this battle. They split us all around when we went to Attu. And I talked these fellows on the boat that I was on, or at least most of them paid attention. They left those rubber shoes aboard, and they did have overshoes. Rubber overshoes. I said, throw the rubber boot away, leave it aboard, do anything but put on extra socks, insoles, anything, and wear their rubber shoes. And they didn't. They didn't have any trouble.
That's fine. Well, you people participated also in the Battle of Attu?
Oh yes. We some of the first ashore at both Red Beach and Massacre Bay, which is Yellow Beach.
What was the purpose of having you people participate in this more military act?
Now we split up there. The scouts led the group ashore on Red Beach, which is over near the Holtz Bay area, and they were the first one to make contact with the enemy too, and they were the first one to get contact through by radio to the main forces at Massacre Bay. But I was in on photo interpretation to see what our photos did, and as an advisor. But I got into trouble a couple of times too. One time I got up where I had no business being, but I got both sides shoot at me once.
Oh, that's not a very comfortable spot.
That sure wasn't, and it wasn't intelligence that got me there either. There was a major with us by the Frederick Bull, and we'd been around there 4 days. We couldn't find out what was happening, and this few Japs had been holding us up, and we couldn't find out what the situation was from General Brown. He said, frankly, gentlemen, I just don't know. And one day Bull says, he didn't give us any orders to. He says, why don't we go up and see what's going on? And of course, Knothead Kelly, he has to get in the lead, and pretty soon, by God, they were sniping at us, and hell, I couldn't get back even to where those guys were. And then I tried to get ahead, and I hit the dirt, and then a machine gun opened on me and just covered me with mud, and then I jumped over the bank, and my own foot soaked up. And then I come down the hill with my hands up. And that was something, though. There was not more than 40 Japs had to hold up 3,000 of us Americans for approximately 5 days.
That's when they were at the top of the hill. And
Yep, they were on that ridge right in Massacre Bay. There's a church set up there today, and I don't know whether they ever had any congregation in, but you can build a church up there. That was long after I left. I got those Japs held her out there. It was a tough one.
Well, it seems like from what I've read that both the Japanese and the Americans had a lot of problems. The Japs had decided not to try and give them any supplies, and the American ships said either something happened to their engines, I've forgotten exactly what, but they weren't able to really assist the men like they should have either.
We were not short of supplies, and neither were the Japanese short of supplies. That is not true. The Japanese had lots of food, they had lots of ammunition, and so did we. We did very, very well in ammunition. The only shortage we had was very poor clothing. That was our main thing. And the Japanese are approximately 1,700 there is what I would say. And they put up quite a fight, I'll tell you.
Well, they had the superior position, of course, being there first.
Well, yes, but see, they'd evidently, when we landed, especially in the Massacre Bayside, they'd evidently, there was only 4 tents there, which held about 10 men to the tent. And that's all the men they were in that area, approximately 40. The main area was in Holst Bay and Chickasaw Harbor, and by far the most of them in Chickasaw Harbor. But our main forces come in under Colonel Cullen, spelt with the C-U-L-I-N, and he got promoted to the rank of general during the battle there. And Bob Thompson was our scout leader. The scouts came were first, he's up there. And then they had the scouts from the 7th Division. Oh, and those poor guys went way around, and they had to go up through a pass where the snow was 10 foot deep. They were pretty dead when they got into where our troops were. And then, of course, the Japs, they really put up a fight getting out of the Holst Bay area, and then they moved back into the Chickasaw Harbor area through that pass, and there was a horrible fight getting up through that pass down in Chickasaw Harbor. But most of the Japanese deaths that I see were they get in a hopeless position and they commit suicide, and their popular way of death was a hand grenade held behind their head. All the back of their head would be gone, the face would still be intact. But a Japanese would definitely, when he saw it was hopeless, then he would commit suicide.
Was this just part of their philosophy? Had they been told that they wouldn't be?
As to what we were taught, that they were told that the tortures that they would get if we captured them was worse than any death they had. And of course, Japanese believed it. See, a Japanese was never taught what to do in case of being captured, because there is no such thing as a Japanese prison. They wouldn't recognize such a thing as a prison. They die for their effort. They don't. They either win or they die. One of the two. There is no in between. And we got approximately 27 prisoners, I believe, on the island of Aleutian, and there was only one that gave up. The rest of them were in shell shock condition first. And this one that did give up was a civilian, and he was a radar expert. And the reason he said he gave up, he wanted to go back and tell the Japanese people how brave their soldiers died for them on the island of Aleutian.
Well, were you people then also involved later when Kiska was in?
Oh, definitely. Oh, yes.
You saw the whole.
I was one of the ones that we landed from the west side, and we had this Colonel Verbeck, who I told you about, drank. He was a character, but he was raised in Japan. He could speak, and write Japanese fluently, but no dummy at all. Even though the only mess hall in ADEC, or any booze on ADEC, was the Navy mess, and you had to be pretty good rank to get in there. Well, Colonel Verbeck would go there. Well, they soon kicked him out because he never got by the booze, and they didn't want anybody in there to booze as bad as him, so he had to come over and eat with us. And just about 9 days, in fact, before we went to Kiska, he came in and he said to us, he said, when we hit the beach, Kiska, he says, don't expect any opposition. He said, I've been to Admiral Kincaid, and he said, I've given my reasons, and Admiral Kincaid has told me to mind my own business. They'll take the credit for what happens down there. They don't have it. And he says, I haven't enough rank, he says, to go to Parliament. And he said, I'll give you my reasons why. He said, you're not going to have any opposition there. says, all of a sudden, he said, in the last couple of days, he said, every powerhouse and every radar on Castner was blown up, and he said, everything else is still standing, and he said, our Air Force is not that accurate. He says, they can't hit things like that, even though they're claiming credit for it. He said, either they've evacuated or the evacuation is in progress. And sure enough, our photo interpretation, we'd studied the beaches, especially on the west side where we was going around. We went down, that time we didn't go on submarine, we went by troop ship. And foggy. You couldn't see hardly the water from the side of the boats. And they give us a compass course for the beach, and we headed for the beach. And I never seen the Pacific that calm. It was just a glassy calm. And I heard a fox bark. And one of the kids there from Scouts from Sitka, oh, he says, that sounds good. He said, there isn't anybody around and that fellow's barking. And then the next thing you know, it broke out. In the brightest moonlight nights, you could have read a newspaper. The whole island was right there, and we was in about 200 yards of the beach. We went ashore, and no trouble landing at all. The surf wasn't even a little bit bad. Climbed up right the bank where we'd studied this landing so thoroughly. There was no Japs there, couldn't have been nothing. And there was machine gun after machine gun nest all along the darn place that he hadn't picked up in the air before this.
Oh, so it really would have been bad if it had been manned.
Oh, well, I don't think there'd been a scout left. And then we headed right straight across the island to Kiska Harbor. And we started breaking down the harbor, coming down where the building was. And old Verbeck says, we stopped right here. I said, why? He said, that pile of boxes is Jim. And it was.
And the Japs had gin waiting for him.
And, that was the only, we found lots of booze and sake on after oodles of it. And great big crocks of sake, canned beef from the Argentines, all kind of excellent food there. And we found a lot of food, rice and stuff, but on Kiska too, but the only pile of booze was that about 30 cases of this bamboo gin that we found there. That's the only booze we found on there. And then we started hunting around for booby traps. Now, there were very few. We found a few where they had made mines and booby traps, but they're all obvious. I don't think anybody got hurt by any of them. And the only people that I know of that killed on that battle, we had two outfits that ran south of us on the west side of the island. They came up, our valley will come down and kind of converge into another valley and a little ridge. We had the two outfits come together, and our outfits.
Not
and
knowing which
they had a fight, and I think we killed about 30. About 15 on each side. That was the only thing. And the only thing on the island was a dog. And there was food on the table, they were eating. And they had to be on 10 or 12 days because there was food on the tables and there was mold on the food, and it takes approximately 10 or 12 days before mold forms on the food.
Yeah, and the ocean. Slow.
In fact, the book, the 1,000-Mile War, he dug into that Brian Garfield quite thoroughly. He can just about give the dates, and I think he does in there, of how long they were gone. Mm-hmm. Because he spent a couple of years depending on research on that. Yeah.
That's a very good book for him.
But they got out of there slick and clean, and that is one of the clever maneuvers of World War II. I don't care what anybody says. They got out of there, and all their small arms, even pistols, were thrown in the bay. They lowered the board so tight that they couldn't carry anything extra. In fact, the officers kept their samurai swords, but nothing else was left on the island. Every personal belonging or anything was left. The little rifles, everything. Mm-hmm. They loaded those boats going out of there so tight that there must have been, we figured between 7,000 and 8,000 there. That's all. Yeah, and that when they took them out of there, I think Brian Garfield said they did it with two boats. They loaded them so tight that they couldn't carry anything with them.
Yeah. And in a moment's notice, apparently.
Yeah, that's right. Mm-hmm. Some of their diaries said that, we had Japanese interpreters, but there's two, and of course, Rebecca could read, but pretty every diary, the soldier, the Marine, or whatever it was, had some regret after after occupying the island, you given up without a fight.
Mm-hmm.
But they all had the same feeling that it was hopeless that they did stay there to fight too. They were not that eager. And you'd see signs of do little, did little, and do nothing next time. Oh, they had a sense of humor. They had a sense of humor. Yeah. Go home, Yankee.
Oh. Well, how long were the Castner scouts in the Aleutian Islands then altogether?
We went down there in August of '42, and we were all out of there shortly after the Battle of Atchee. In fact, I came back. In fact, I got back to Anchorage Christmas Eve in 1943, and they were few out there 4 or 5 months later. That was about it. And then we even made a pipeline survey from Livengood to Point Barrow for the Navy.
Oh, really?
And we mapped the coast from Falls Pass to Demarcation Point.
Mm-hmm.
We just roamed Alaska then for the next couple of years. Mm-hmm. It was very interesting.
Well, did you stay together as a Castner union, as a scout union?
Yep, we sure did. Yep.
Even though that there wasn't any really active.
Well, they came. Things changed, but they come partner taking us to Russia, and we was going to go down as scout from the end of the Kamchatka Peninsula into the Kuriles.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I don't know what happened anyway. I think the Russians put kibosh to it. Didn't want us there.
Yeah. Well, at the end of World War II or World War I, they had trouble getting some of the Americans and some of the British, I believe it was, to leave Siberia way back in World War I, and maybe they thought that might happen again.
Well, it could be. That could be. I don't know. But anyway, it was all of a sudden. Well, I think maybe the coming of the atom bomb could have had a lot to do with it too. Maybe if we'd had to make beachhead landings in the Kuriles Islands and so on and so forth, and progress on both up and down toward Honshu, they probably would have used it. But I think the dropping of that atom bomb just
made the Aleutians just sort of a waiting game.
Yeah, it dropped it off.
Well, do you ever wish that you could go back to the Aleutians and do some of these things again?
Oh, I've been out there, and I enjoy it every time I go out there. In fact, I was never one that disliked the Aleutians because, to me, there was something interesting in the Aleutian Islands at all. I feel sorry for some of the soldiers that got there and spent as much as 20 months or 2 years in one location. Where we probably never spent over a month in a location. We was gone to a different island. There was something every day. There was something going on.
Mm-hmm. Do you think the Aleutians have any future as far as?
I think the Aleutians would have a wonderful future in a sea type of people, and maybe something in the farming of sheep and so on and so forth. But the seafood in the Aleutian Island is tremendous. It's well known. But you've got to have a hardy Nordic type people or something to do it. You can't take any landlubber from the Midwest out there. There's no place for him.
Yes.